At 63, I still sleep with one eye open. My late wife, Marcia, used to tease me about it. Gavin Pierce, you'd hear a moth sneeze in a thunderstorm. She was right. So when my phone buzzed just after midnight on a Thursday in November, I was awake before the second ring. I was home in Raleigh's Mordecai neighborhood, on one of those quiet streets where the oak trees are older than the houses, and you can recognize your neighbor's car by the sound of its engine. Nothing ever happened here. Until that night. I looked at the screen. Dominic. My oldest son hadn't called me that late since his mother's funeral. Dominic was a routine kind of man. 7 a.m. check-ins. Birthday texts. 2 days early. Christmas cards with handwritten notes. He didn't make midnight phone calls. I answered immediately. Dom? Dad? His voice was calm. Too calm. Not panic. Control. The kind of control a man uses when he's been preparing himself for this conversation. Don't talk. Just listen. I sat up. Son, it's midnight. Dad. Something in his voice made me stop. I'd heard that tone only twice before. Once when he told me his mother's cancer had spread, and once when he told me he was going to prison for something he didn't do. I'm listening. Turn off every light in the house. Don't touch your laptop. Don't touch the router. Go to the attic. Lock the door from the inside. He paused. I heard him breathe. And Dad, don't tell Tristan. My stomach tightened. Tristan Hale, my son-in-law, Delilah's husband of 9 years. He'd been sleeping in my guest room for the past 4 nights because, according to him, his firm was renovating their downtown Charlotte condo. I'd believed him. I'd made him pot roast. I'd poured him my good bourbon. Dominic, I whispered. You're scaring me. Good. His voice cracked for the first time. Be scared. Be quiet. And go. Now. I didn't ask why. I shut off the lights and moved through the house in darkness, past the family photos from Wrightsville Beach and the cross-stitch Marcia had hung beside the linen closet. I climbed the narrow pull-down stairs into the attic, locked the door, and sat on an old moving box labeled Marcia Winter Clothes. I barely breathed. I had no idea yet that 3 feet beneath me was a secret someone had buried 8 years ago. The attic had never become the reading room Marcia dreamed about. It was still half-finished insulation. Old furniture, cardboard boxes, and 2 round windows that let in just enough porch light from the neighbor's house to see shapes. I'd barely been up there since she died. Then I noticed a warped section of floor near the east wall. We'd repaired a leak there 2 summers earlier, but one board had never settled quite right. I knelt and looked through the narrow gap. The guest room below was dark. Then the lamp came on. Tristan stood in the middle of the room, fully awake, checking his watch. He looked exactly the way he always did, perfectly dressed, perfectly controlled, handsome in a way that never reached his eyes. He worked in private equity, or at least that was the story he told everyone. Capital allocation, asset restructuring. Half the time, I needed a dictionary just to understand him. Delilah would laugh whenever I admitted it. Tristan never did. He smiled like my ignorance amused him. Then he walked to the old armoire in the corner, the one that had belonged to Marcia's mother. He moved it aside without hesitation, not with effort, not with caution, like he already knew exactly what was underneath. The floor looked normal. Then Tristan pressed 2 fingers against the baseboard. A hidden panel popped loose. My stomach dropped. Behind it was a safe. I had lived in that house for 26 years. I knew every loose floorboard, every stubborn light switch, every patch of wall that creaked when it rained. I had never seen that safe. Tristan spun the dial left, right, left. 20 seconds later, it opened. He pulled out a thick folder secured with a rubber band and sat on the edge of the bed. He opened it under the lamp. I couldn't read the pages from the attic, but I could see the heading, Last Will and Testament. Beneath it was a name I knew better than my own, Marcia Elaine Pierce. My hands went numb. Marcia had a will, of course. We'd made one together in 2009 with an attorney on Glenwood Avenue. I watched her sign it. After she died, that estate was settled exactly as the document required. Dominic got his share. Delilah got hers. I received mine. There was also a small gift for Sienna, Delilah's old college roommate and the godmother of their children, someone Marcia had loved like family. That was the will, the only will. I knew because I had been there. So what was Tristan doing with another one inside a hidden safe in my house? He turned a page, then another. Then he took out his phone and began photographing every page. No hesitation, no surprise. Just a man calmly finishing a job. He had been in my house for 4 days, and he had waited until he thought I was asleep. Suddenly, Dominic's warning made perfect sense. He hadn't said, "Be careful." He hadn't said, "Something might happen." He had said, "Don't tell Tristan." And now I understood why. I leaned back against the attic wall and started doing the math. 8 years ago, Dominic had gone to prison on a federal wire fraud charge. The evidence had appeared almost out of nowhere. The case moved so fast that even Dominic knew something was wrong. He refused the public defender because he didn't trust the way the whole thing had been put together. He spent 22 months at Butner Federal, then came home quieter than the son who had left. Somehow, his record was partially expunged. I never learned the full story. Not long after that, he joined the FBI. I used to think that was Dominic's way of turning a bad chapter into something useful. Marcia would have cried at his badge ceremony if she'd lived to see it. But sitting in that attic while Tristan photographed a will that shouldn't exist, I started wondering if Dominic had joined the Bureau for a different reason. Maybe he hadn't been looking for a new life. Maybe he'd been looking for someone. And suddenly, the pieces started fitting together. For 8 years, my son had been hunting the man sleeping in my guest room while I'd been feeding that same man pot roast. When the lamp downstairs finally went dark, I stayed frozen in the attic. I could still smell cedar from Marcia's old clothes, but everything else felt different now. I knew one thing for certain. Tristan Hale was about to have the worst anniversary dinner of his life. I just didn't know how right I was. By dawn, the darkness outside had faded into gray between the oak trees. I'd spent 4 hours sitting on that box of Marcia's winter clothes, my knees stiff, my mind running through the same questions without finding a different answer. Then my phone vibrated once. Dominic. "Still up there?" I typed back. "Where else would I be?" 3 dots appeared. "Come down. Side door. Keep the lights off." He was here. I slipped outside in my house slippers and crossed the freezing yard. 2 houses down, a gray Chevy Tahoe sat dark on Elm Street. I climbed into the passenger seat. Dominic looked like he hadn't slept in days. I would later learn that he hadn't. He was 38, but exhaustion had pushed 10 years onto his face. In the darkness, I saw Marcia in him, the same jaw, the same eyes that never wasted a second on something that didn't matter. He wore plain civilian clothes, no badge, no FBI jacket, just my son, sitting behind the wheel with a thick folder resting on his lap. I stared at him. "Pot roast," I said. He frowned. "What?" "I made that man pot roast, Dominic." I let him drink my Blantons. Something almost like a smile crossed his face. "I know, Dad. You could have warned me sooner." His expression disappeared. "I couldn't." He looked down at the folder. "Not until I had physical evidence." And that was when I realized the 8 years of silence hadn't been because Dominic had forgotten what happened to him. He'd been waiting for proof. "Everything before tonight was circumstantial," Dominic said. I needed him to open that safe. I turned toward him. "You knew about the safe?" "For 14 months. The answer hit harder than the cold outside. "Start talking." Dominic did. For the next 41 minutes, I said nothing. That alone should tell you how serious it was. It had started with money. Marcia's estate wasn't enormous, but it was worth more than $400,000 between the house, her life insurance, and the savings she'd built over 30 years by saving every dollar she could. Enough to matter. Enough to tempt the wrong person. The original will had been simple. Marcia and I signed it together in 2009 at a law office on Glenwood Avenue. She had just finished her second round of chemo, and her hands shook as she signed. Everything was divided equally between Dominic, Delilah, and me, with $15,000 set aside for Sienna, the woman Marcia had loved like another daughter. But the will used to settle the estate wasn't that will. Someone had replaced it. Dominic's inheritance had been cut down to $8,000, while the rest was added to Delilah's share. And because Delilah was married to Tristan, the man who engineered the fraud effectively, took control of what should have been my son's inheritance while Dominic was sitting in Butner Federal for a crime he didn't commit. "How?" I asked. Dominic didn't hesitate. He had someone inside the law firm. A paralegal was paid to replace the documents before they were filed. The original disappeared. He paused. We believe Tristan kept it as insurance. Insurance against who? Delilah. He said her name carefully, in case she ever turned against him. I stared through the windshield. Tristan hadn't just stolen from my family. He had kept the real will as a weapon against my daughter. I wanted to put my fist through the dashboard, but I kept my hands still. Then I asked the question that mattered most. What about the wire fraud case? Dominic took a slow breath. Fabricated. He explained that Tristan had used an old college friend at a Charlotte brokerage to create fake transactions and shell accounts that appeared to lead straight to Dominic. Then they sent an anonymous tip to the SEC. 6 weeks later, the case was with the DOJ. It had been clean. Too clean. This wasn't something he decided to do one afternoon, Dominic said. He planned it before he proposed to Delilah. I felt something inside me go still. Before he proposed. Tristan had already been building a case to destroy my son before he ever asked my daughter to marry him. He had sat at my kitchen table, looked me in the eye, asked for Delilah's hand, and continued carrying out a plan that would put her brother behind bars. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. After you got out? After you joined the bureau? Why did I have to learn all this in my attic at midnight? Dominic finally looked at me. Because you would have gone to Delilah. I said nothing. And Delilah would have gone to Tristan. He let that sit for a second. I finished the thought. And Tristan would have disappeared. Or worse, Dominic said. He had leverage over the paralegal, the broker, and at least 2 other people involved. If he knew we were coming, they could have disappeared too. He looked toward my house. I needed him comfortable. I needed him to think he was still in control. And suddenly I understood why Dominic had waited 8 years. He wasn't chasing revenge. He was building a case that Tristan couldn't escape. I needed him walking around believing he'd already won. Dominic told me they'd had the house under intermittent surveillance for 8 months. They'd caught Tristan accessing the safe during a visit the previous Easter, but they couldn't see what was inside. Without a warrant, they couldn't search it. And without probable cause, independent of the surveillance, they couldn't get that warrant. So they waited. You used my house as bait, I said. Dominic shook his head. I used his greed as bait. Your house was just where he kept it. I wanted to be angry with him. I really did. But the anger wouldn't stick. Not after everything. Not after 4 hours in that attic. Not after realizing I'd been serving pot roast and my best bourbon to a man my son had spent 8 years hunting. Not after 22 months of visiting Dominic in federal prison and watching him come home quieter than the boy who went in. Beneath all of it was something I hadn't expected. Pride. My son had played this carefully. He had waited. He had built the case instead of rushing in and giving Tristan a chance to escape. What happens now? I asked. Dominic reached into the folder and handed me a photograph. In the gray morning light, I saw a cream-colored invitation with gold lettering. The return address was in Delilah's handwriting. Tristan and Delilah Hale 9th anniversary dinner. Saturday, November 14th, 7 p.m. Brasserie LaCroix, downtown Raleigh. Tomorrow night. Dominic took the invitation back. We're going to let him enjoy his appetizer. I looked at him. And then? He slid the invitation carefully back into the folder. Then we end it. I stared through the windshield at my house, the oak trees, the porch where I'd spent 26 years of my life. Then I remembered something Delilah had told me 2 days earlier. Sienna's coming to the dinner, I said. Dominic glanced at me. She's already been briefed. I turned toward him. Sienna knows? He nodded. That changed something. Sienna wasn't just Delilah's old college roommate. She was Marcia's goddaughter, someone who had been close enough to know the family before Tristan ever entered it. And apparently, she had a role in what was coming. I looked back at the invitation. I had no idea what tomorrow night would look like, but for the first time in 8 years, my son did, and he was ready. I said maybe, I told him. I had no idea what that maybe was going to become. Dominic gave me a sideways look. Sienna's already been briefed. I frowned. Sienna knows? She's known for 6 months. She's been helping us verify the documents. She remembered details about Mom's original will that never showed up in the paper trail. I pictured Sienna, quiet, sharp, the kind of woman who noticed everything and volunteered almost nothing. Marcia had always trusted her. Now I understood why. Dominic looked at the clock. Go get some sleep, Dad. Tomorrow night's going to be a long one. I stepped out of the Tahoe and stood on the sidewalk in my house slippers, shivering in the November air. Before he pulled away, I looked back through the window. Dom. He lowered the window. Your mother knew, didn't she? He held my eyes. She knew something was wrong with Tristan. Then he put the Tahoe in gear and drove away before I could ask anything else. I walked back inside, past Marcia's cross-stitch, and stopped in the kitchen. Down the hall, Tristan Hale was still asleep in my guest room, completely unaware that the ground beneath his carefully built life had started to crack. Tomorrow night, he would sit at an anniversary dinner with his wife, their friends, and the pastor who had married them. I would be there too. But this time, I wasn't serving anyone pot roast. Some men spend their entire lives waiting for justice and never see it arrive. I had decided I wasn't going to be one of them. Saturday morning, I woke up early and made a full breakfast: eggs, toast, coffee. My mother used to say, never start something important on an empty stomach. At a little after 8, Tristan came downstairs in his robe, looking rested and completely at ease. Any coffee left? He asked. I poured him a cup. Enjoy it, I said. Inside, I was thinking something very different. He sat at Marcia's kitchen table, the same table she had picked out years ago, and scrolled through his phone like a man who had nothing to fear. And why would he? For 8 years, everything had gone his way. He had sent my son to prison. He had taken what should have been my wife's inheritance. He had slept under my roof, eaten my food, drank my bourbon, and sat beside my daughter at Christmas like he belonged in our family. Big night tonight, he said, without looking up. Sure is. Delilah's been planning it for months. You coming? I turned from the counter and met his eyes. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Tristan. For a fraction of a second, something changed in his expression. A flicker, a question. Then it vanished behind that polished smile. Good, he said. Should be a great night. I watched him take another sip of coffee and wondered how long a man could keep smiling once he realized the room had stopped belonging to him. That evening we were heading to Brasserie La Croix in downtown Raleigh, the kind of restaurant where the menu didn't bother listing prices. If you had to ask what dinner cost, you probably weren't the target customer. Dark wood, candlelight, white tablecloths, and the kind of atmosphere Tristan loved because every table came with an audience. I arrived early, just as Dominic had told me. The dining room was already filling up, and our reserve section waited in the back with 8 chairs, flowers in the center, and handwritten place cards at every setting. Delilah had planned every detail herself. She had spent weeks preparing a beautiful anniversary dinner for a man who had been plotting against her family long before he ever put a ring on her finger. I sat down, ordered water, and waited. Sienna arrived a few minutes later in a burgundy dress. She looked like someone who had been carrying a secret for 6 months and was finally ready to put it down. She crossed the room, sat beside me, and squeezed my hand. You okay? Ask me in an hour. She almost smiled. Marcia would have loved this. Marcia would have arrived an hour early and already briefed the manager. That earned a real smile, brief, sad but genuine. By a little after 7, everyone else had arrived. 2 couples from Tristan's firm, people I'd met at Christmas parties who had no idea what tonight was really about. Pastor Gerald Webb was there too, the same man who had married Tristan and Delilah 9 years earlier. A good man, the kind who made what was coming feel even harder. Then Delilah walked in wearing green, looking so much like her mother that my chest tightened. She was laughing at something Tristan said. She looked happy. For 1 second, I almost hated what we were about to do to that happiness. Tristan, meanwhile, took over the table like he always did. Handshakes, backslaps, easy laughter. He refilled everyone's wine before the waiter could reach them and launched into a story about a golf trip that had the whole table leaning closer. He had a way of drawing people in. Dangerous things often do. He sat across from me and raised his glass. I raised mine. Enjoy the appetizer. The words Dominic had used that morning came back to me. Dinner began. Bread, salads, wine, laughter. 9 years of Delilah believing she had married a good man. Pastor Webb told a story about their wedding. I've performed hundreds of ceremonies, he said, but I've never seen a groom so calm. Calm, I thought. Of course he was calm. He already believed he had won. Then my phone vibrated beneath the table. Dominic. 2 minutes. I placed the phone face down and took a slow drink of water. Beside me, Sienna went completely still. The main course arrived. Tristan was in the middle of another story about a deal his firm had closed when the front door opened. Dominic walked in wearing a dark navy suit, white shirt, no tie. Two people followed him, a woman in a blazer and a man in a gray jacket. They didn't look around like ordinary guests. They moved with the quiet confidence of people who knew exactly why they were there. Conversations began dying one by one. Forks slowed, heads turned. Tristan stopped speaking, and for the first time that night, the smile disappeared from his face. The first table near the entrance went silent. Then another. Across the room, people from Tristan's firm looked toward the door, their expressions changing as they recognized the man walking in. Tristan still had his back turned. Delilah saw Dominic first. Her face lit up. Dom, oh my gosh, you came. I didn't know you were. Then she noticed the two people behind him, and the rest of her sentence disappeared. Dominic walked straight through the dining room without looking anywhere but at Tristan. Tristan slowly turned, and the moment he saw my son, I watched 9 years of confidence drain from his face. There he was, the real Tristan. Dominic stopped at the head of the table. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Tristan Allen Hale. Tristan stared at him. You're under arrest for wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and tampering with a legal instrument. The entire table froze. Tristan managed to find his voice. What are you doing? This is a private dinner. This is my anniversary. Dominic continued reading him his rights. Tristan leaned forward slightly, and for a split second I saw the calculation behind his eyes. How much does he have? Can I negotiate? Is there still a way out? Whatever you think you know, Tristan said quietly. We can talk about this. Dominic looked at him. I have the original will. Silence swallowed the table. I have everything that was inside your safe. I have photographs of the documents you took Thursday night. I have testimony from the paralegal at Ketterman and Associates who was paid $22,000 to replace the will. And I have 8 years of financial records connecting you to the shell accounts used to frame my brother. Tristan's face tightened. Dominic wasn't finished. I also have your college roommate. He sends his regards from federal custody in Charlotte. Tristan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The woman in the blazer stepped forward with handcuffs. Tristan stood slowly from the table. From the anniversary dinner Delilah had spent weeks planning. From the candles, the flowers, the white tablecloths, and the pastor who had once called him the calmest groom he'd ever seen. As the cuffs closed around his wrists, Tristan looked across the table at me. Only me. I could see the moment he finally understood. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I just held his gaze. He had sat at my table, drank my bourbon, ate my food, slept under my roof. He had stolen from my wife and lied to my face for years, believing I was the easiest man in the room to fool. He was wrong. The handcuffs clicked shut. Pastor Webb made a stunned sound. One of Tristan's colleagues pushed her chair back as if the table had suddenly caught fire. But Delilah didn't move. She sat perfectly still in her green dress, both hands flat against the white tablecloth. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stared at her husband as if she were seeing him for the first time. That was the part I knew would hurt the most. Dominic's colleagues escorted Tristan toward the door. He didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice. The polished composure returned, barely holding together. Even then, he couldn't completely stop performing. At the doorway, he paused and looked back at Delilah. She stared down at her hands. Tristan waited a second, then walked out. The restaurant stayed silent until a fork finally touched a plate and everyone remembered how to breathe again. Dominic returned to the table and sat in Tristan's chair. He looked at his sister. I'm sorry. Delilah raised her eyes. They were dry. How long? 8 years building the case. 6 months knowing we had enough to move. Her voice was flat. The will? Mom's real will. Yes. She nodded slowly, as if placing the information somewhere inside herself for later. And my share? Dominic answered. It goes back to what Mom intended. Equal shares. Yours, mine, Dad's. Sienna gets what Mom left her too. Delilah looked down the table at Sienna. They exchanged one silent glance, the kind shared by two women who had known each other since they were 19. Then Delilah turned toward me. Daddy. Her voice broke on that single word. I stood and walked to her. I held her the way I had when she was 7, and thunderstorms scared her. She wrapped both arms around me. I've got you, I whispered. I've always got you, she cried once, quietly. Then she wiped her face with the linen napkin, looked at the untouched food in front of her, and surprised all of us. Is the food good here? I stared at her. What? The food. I chose this place and I've never eaten here. I'd like to eat something. I sat back down. Dominic did too. Sienna looked at Pastor Webb, who seemed like a man watching an 8-year sermon suddenly write itself. I raised my hand. Somebody get the waiter. And we ate. 3 weeks later, I stood in my kitchen with a cup of coffee while winter settled over Mordecai. The oak trees were bare. The neighborhood was quiet. On the counter sat a green folder with Marcia's handwriting across the tab. Important. I had moved it there the night before. Inside was the original will. Restored, certified, and properly filed with the court. Marcia's real words. Her real wishes. The document that had been hidden while my son paid the price for someone else's greed. I placed my hand on the folder. We got him, Marcia, I said softly. Took us a while, but we got him. The coffee finished brewing. Outside, a bird broke the morning silence. I took a sip. For the first time in 8 years, it tasted like coffee instead of memory.